Statements and communication by ministers. The chair recognizes the right honorable member for Centerville.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to present the mid-year budget statement for the 6-month period ending December 31st, 2013. I want to open my remarks on this occasion by focusing first on the economy and jobs, for those are subjects that are very dear to our fellow Bahamians. And in fact, members opposite continue with the refrain, "Where are the jobs?" Members will be aware that just last month at the Bahamas Business Outlook Conference, I shared my deep-seated optimism for our economic future across the various key sectors of the economy and the breadth and width of our archipelago. As I laid out in detail in my speech that day, my government has worked tirelessly over the past 18 months to promote the further development and expansion of economic activity and the attendant employment opportunities. As I will touch on shortly, the economy is growing and unemployment is declining. And I want to say it so every Bahamian could understand and ultimately hear what I have said, that the economy of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is growing and unemployment is now declining. We have clearly gotten through the worst of the global crisis, and I'm to say this morning that the future looks very bright. I would like to highlight a number of the major new developments and foreign direct investment projects that have resulted from our efforts, namely in Grand Bahama, a joint venture with the Sunwing Blue Diamond Group and Hutchison Whampoa and the government for a new 4-star Memories Resort, creating up to 1,000 jobs. Mr. Speaker, these are actual jobs coming up. And Mr. Speaker, where there is consternation, Mr. Speaker, we will obviously help them to count the jobs and to count the new jobs that are created as a result of this particular development. As well as Balleria plans to upgrade its existing 400-passenger ferry to a newer and larger 1,200-passenger fast ferry, helping to restore Grand Bahama's reputation as a fun destination. Again, Mr. Speaker, I repeat, this represents jobs. It represents more new jobs, and I would wish us to understand that. And I think it's important, colleagues, that you do clap for each one, because these are new developments in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. The opening in Grand Bahama of the Island Outsourced Contact Center in Freeport, with a projected 200 employees by year end, representing the first step in the establishment of a call center industry in Freeport, in Grand Bahama, in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, and so that colleagues who represent the island of Grand Bahama could be well aware, the government is in contact with the parties connected to the former Ginn Development and West End with a view to reviewing the project. And, Mr. Speaker, we are optimistic, Mr. Speaker, that that will be a source of new jobs, more jobs for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And we are also reviewing very, very active proposals where people are on the ground to provide major attractions in Grand Bahama, because I'm able to say, and I hope we will see certified during this debate, that even those who are near blind, Mr. Speaker, would now be able to near see that things are happening in Grand Bahama. Yes, sir. We are also reviewing proposals, as I've indicated on that. In Bimini, Mr. Speaker, Genting's Resort World subsidiary has taken over management of the resort, opened a new casino, and employed a staff of 500. And just in case now, I'm talking about Bimini.
Yes.
These are jobs, and they are new jobs in Bimini. Thank you very much. A deep water jetty is also under construction, and the airport and other public works are being substantially upgraded and expanded and will result, as we speak, in more jobs, more new jobs, Mr. Speaker. And so that we can take full credit for what we're doing. Because sometimes we tend not to. A new 5-star hotel is under construction and will open, I hope, by May, but most certainly will open this year, of that you could be assured, employing a minimum of 300 people, representing new jobs and new interventions in Bimini.
More new jobs.
More new jobs. The Abacos. As we speak in the Abacos, and I'm sure the Member of Parliament for South Abaco could certify this, the Bakers Bay upscale residential resort continues to flourish, and I was told a few days ago that they have now topped over 600 employees when you add the employees who are permanently employed and those who are employed in construction at Bakers Bay, a dynamic development taking place, Mr. Speaker, as we speak on the island of Abaco. And I was advised that it was 4:50 when we got in office. And Mr. Speaker, I would leave it to the Minister for Investments to speak about the development at Winding Bay. We have good news for Winding Bay, which is also in the island of Abaco, which will represent more jobs. The construction of the new port in North Abaco and the improvements and opening of the new terminal at Marsh Harbor International Airport will stimulate activity and jobs. And you could rest assured, Mr. Speaker, that we made a decision to continue with the decision for there to be a new port in North Abaco. We are continuing with the process leading to the opening of the new terminal building in Marsh Harbor. And as you would appreciate, Mr. Speaker, they represent more jobs on the island of Abaco. And so Abaco could feel quite comfortable with the future as we look to it moving forward. You have jobs, my brother.
More.
The Black Fly Fishing Lodge is in operation, and the Sandpiper Inn should open this year with 150 employed and more jobs to be created. I'm telling you, Mr. Speaker, I feel good about this. I'm reading it so that they could have what I've read for them. Never mind the fact that I appear to be very familiar with what I'm reading, and that is because I am on the ground working, doing those things. The Berry Islands and North Andros, the sale and continued development of Chub Key Resort, Mr. Speaker, is in progress. There are going to be new beginnings and new openings, and Mr. Speaker, people of North Andros will look again for them to be properly employed there. It is happening in the Berry Islands, and we are happy with it. More jobs in Chub Key. That's it. And I'd like to say that discussions are underway for the acquisition and development of Bird Key and Whale Key. And Mr. Speaker, I don't have to tell you when they acquired that it means more jobs and more new jobs. San Salvador and the Exumas. We put in place incentives and collective strategies to successfully address the concerns of Sandals, Emerald Bay, and Club Med, Mr. Speaker. And we were placed in a position where we had to move to protect hundreds of jobs of the employees there. The government made the decisions, incentivized them in a collaborative marketing exercise, and Mr. Speaker, protecting those jobs in Sandals. Club Med has now joined with Canadian partners to carry out a $90 million refurbishment and expansion project at Columbus Isle Village and on adjacent land in San Salvador. Mr. Speaker, we've already heralded that $90 million expansion on Club Med will result in new jobs, Mr. Speaker, new opportunities for new Bahamians, Mr. Speaker, in San Salvador. And so that we understand, Mr. Speaker, the import of all of this, I would wish to also indicate that my government, with a company called Sand and Ocean is planning the construction of a 125-room boutique hotel. Why I say it's going to happen? Because they are the financiers of the Club Med expansion in Joint Veg. A group of French Canadians who have come into San Salvador, who have joined with Club Med, who are causing the expansion of Club Med, and also will place on that absolutely beautiful beach a 125-room boutique hotel. And I come to tell you this morning that represents more jobs and more new jobs. And to the representative of San Salvador, you would be well aware that in addition to all those jobs I have just pronounced upon, that we have agreed on 2 new projects which have just been approved for a boutique hotel near the landfall of Columbus and a residential development at the Columbus Landing subdivision. Mr. Speaker, San Salvador is on its way, it's flying, it's happening, and that's what it's going to be. And so that we are clear, Mr. Speaker, the government, through all of these things, are committed, the government is committed to best environmental practices. And best environmental practices, Mr. Speaker, means proper environmental impact assessments and proper environmental management plans in place. In all such developments, emphasis is placed on best environmental practices so that future generations of Bahamians will be able to experience what this current generation is experiencing. Mr. Speaker, the Normans Key Residential and Resort Project is in the advanced stage of planning. Normans Key is a beautiful place. The former government did a lot to pass on that land to others. I won't comment much on that now. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that there is a development that is progressing. A group of U.S. investors is developing a small resort on Stocking Island. Again, Mr. Speaker, in the Exumas, you could expect there to be more jobs. Sandals has acquired additional property holdings at Emerald Bay to be used in future plans for expansion, which they are actively pursuing. Sandals and Unique Vacation, which will shortly break ground in a new corporate headquarters to be located in Western New Providence. This is an addition to a multi-million-dollar upgrading now being completed at the Royal Bahamian Hotel and Private Island. A lot of things happen. Mr. Speaker, so that one could clearly understand that there are not unintelligent people on this side. There are people who love the Bahamas, who believe in the Bahamas, who believe in Bahamians, who love Bahamians, Mr. Speaker, and who are doing things, Mr. Speaker, that will bring a new horizon, new levels of expectation for Bahamians all over the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, on the island of Eleuthera, advanced heads of agreement negotiations are underway for the construction of a 5-star resort at Cotton Bay to be managed by Four Seasons, and at Jacks Bay Eleuthera properties are moving ahead with plans for another 5-star branded resort, golf club and marina. The first phase scheduled to open in about 12 months' time. So, Mr. Speaker, I've come to say to the people of Eleuthera, don't just wait on the mini hospital for Palmetto Point, but you can expect there to be jobs, and to the people in the South, relief. It's spelled R-E-L-I-E. Mr. Speaker, in New Providence, Atlantis is proceeding with a $40 million in capital expenditures, including upgrades and refurbishment of the Cove Hotel and Royal Towers. Mr. Speaker, it represents new jobs. You just got to go over there and see what has happened. They have an Olives restaurant, they have a Moon Club. Just ask them. You ain't got to ask us whether new jobs are being created, new people being given opportunities, Mr. Speaker. Even at Atlantis, the established Atlantis. Albany, Mr. Speaker, we're just in the process of completing the heads of agreement for Albany, which will be a very special signing and a special announcement we are going to make, because we have very carefully approached this development at Albany. And so that people understand, I've been encouraged to continue to describe Albany in the context of Monaco. And that Monaco, based on 400 acres of land, and the developers at Albany have 600 acres, and their intention is to make Albany the Monaco of this part of the world, the creme de la creme in terms of investment. And so the fact of the matter is that Albany now will move ahead with its next phase of expansion, offering 1,300 new jobs during construction and 300 additional jobs in the operational stages of the resort. So again, as I said, to those who ask the question of whether or not we are doing anything, let me say it again. We are in New Providence, where the refrain is, the Deputy Prime Minister said we're going to create 10,000 jobs. Where the 10,000 jobs are, I just want you to start counting, and what we're going to do is we're going to help you count. Okay? Because Albany will move ahead, as I said, offering 1,300 new jobs during construction and 300 additional jobs in the operational stages of the resort. What I like about it, to the member of Engliston, has always a particular quest, Mr. Speaker, in matters of this kind in terms of social contributions and interventions by developers. I shan't talk it now because it's so special, but I just wish her to know that her words have been adhered to.
From Auckland, you know.
Mark Holovesco's boutique resort at Lyford Key is proceeding on schedule. Again, Mr. Speaker, everybody knows that that's new jobs and more jobs. The Palm Hotel, you know those old things that were right out there doing nothing? Well, the Palms Hotel is now being upgraded into a Marriott courtyard, Mr. Speaker, and you just got to keep on driving down and looking, and you're going to see it transformed before your very eyes into a Marriott courtyard here, right on the corner of Nassau Street. And these will be new jobs, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, because I'm very optimistic, I have chosen again to, in advance, at the risk of them coming back and saying, what happened to the Hilton Hotel? I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that I expect the purchase of the Hilton and Hotel and South Ocean Beach properties to proceed in the ensuing months, Mr. Speaker. We're working very hard on it. We're pushing it. The environment and the investment environment has changed. The climate is different. They have a different government that is much more proactive, much more responsive, much more dedicated to these things. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We are producing results. And then, Mr. Speaker, we don't have to argue over it. This new Bahama development is scheduled to open at the year end, and it is scheduled to provide a minimum of 5,000 new permanent jobs. as God would have it, the project started with us. And God has placed us in a position
To see it finished.
to see it finished.
Right, wanted to right.
The onus,
Past 10,000 now.
the onus of,
Past 10,000 now.
you see? The onus of breezes, and Mr. Speaker, I am sure, Mr. Speaker, that everyone knows for every economic action, all right, in terms of development, there are the indirect jobs that flow from it. So one just has to do the math. The owners of breezes are in discussions with the government on acquiring adjacent government-owned land at Cable Beach, and let me hasten to say, not Goodman's Bay, but adjacent land owned by the government for a major expansion. They're having just completed upgrading of some of the resort's facilities. And so, Mr. Speaker, we're optimistic that Cable Beach is headed for a renaissance of a special kind. Honorable members will also know that my government has worked diligently for the establishment of the Bahamas Agriculture and Marine Science Institute in North Andros.
Yes, sir.
And I want to emphasize this, Mr. Speaker, because this will boost farm production and marine resources for both local consumption and export. Mr. Speaker, the opening of the Institute this year marks a major effort on our part at diversification, not only of the North Andros economy, but diversification of the economy. Okay? It is a new paradigm. And Mr. Speaker, integrating into the mix modern techniques to produce multiple crops on a year-round basis.
Yes, sir.
The intention is to make produce more available and cheaper for the Bahamian public in food stores, restaurants, and hotels throughout the nation. The initiative will also lead to the creation of new export markets and enhance the competitiveness of our tourism industry. And Mr. Speaker, I just went down to ceremoniously plant the first banana sucker.
Yes.
And they told me they paid $3 per sucker. And then the following 2 days, they came in with a little package for me, which had about 20 little banana seedlings. And they said, these 20 cost 10 cents out of a culture laboratory in Mexico. Well, what I want to tell you through tissue culture, and what I want to be able to announce, is that we have the expertise. There are Bahamians who are qualified in the science of tissue culture, who will, in fact, Mr. Speaker, be a part of this mix. Now, I just want to be able to tell you this, Mr. Speaker. There is a tutorial commercial farm associated with this facility, where there will be livestock, and the first 40 or so already on the ground.
One, the sheep had kid already?
Yeah, I named the sheep Beauty. Beauty. It was no. It is important for me. No, it is important for me to announce that.
I was going to say lamb.
And we are talking with people who have connections with the former government, who would wish to be involved in agriculture in a very meaningful way, and who, in principle, I have agreed with in being full participants in this exercise, so that, in fact, they're able to use their considerable expertise in being able to advance the production of what we're talking about. And just discussions like, you have 300 heads, you give me your 300 head, let me keep them and mix them with my breed, and I'll give you yours back in the form of an upgraded breed. Those kinds of things are happening where there's a great deal of excitement. But the most important thing for members to know during the course of this debate with respect to the tutorial or the commercial farm is that it will extend itself to the farmers in Andros and to meet with them with a view to ensuring, Mr. Speaker, that we're not duplicating things and that a crop calendar could come out for Andros. So the school is growing certain things and the farmers in Andros are growing certain things, and the extension of that will enable best practices, Mr. Speaker, to be utilized by the farmers because the expertise resident at the school will extend itself to those farmers in North Andros. But I go further. To those who represent Abaco. As you would appreciate, you have 50,000 acres of arable land in Abaco that is not properly utilized or even exploited. And that the school's remit is, again, through extension officers, some of whom work now for agriculture, is to extend itself into Abaco, into Grand Bahama, where there are 30,000 arable acres, and where they say that the science of soil tells them that the red soil that grows pineapples and eleuthera really is the best soil for the growing of sweet potatoes, and that it can be produced in quantities to be exported. I don't know what you can get out of this, but listen, I just want you all to know. Yes. Recognize good news when you see it. And then don't let them ask you, Christy, where are the jobs? They're right here, all around us. But Mr. Speaker, to the business of the day, with all of this economic momentum, Mr. Speaker, it would be foolhardy, Mr. Speaker, for those who are outside in the country speaking about VAT and all of the other vexatious issues. It is foolhardy for them to believe that a government that is bringing about such a renaissance in the economy would take action to jeopardize the economy. That's right. I said this to the, I said it to the International Monetary Fund. I said it to the Ministry of Finance people. Do you think that given what I have put into my public life, I would invest so much in this new generation of leaders who have come into my party to write their epitaph? That I would do that? I said, no. Yesterday, again, I had a meeting with the private sector, and I repeated the same thing. We clearly want a dynamic economy. Yes. And the government is committed to growing the economy and not retarding it. That's right. So I also wish to highlight at the very outset that the government's fiscal plan is on target.
Yes.
Listen now, let me say it again. That the government's fiscal plan is on target for this fiscal year. Based on the fiscal results through the mid-year, we will meet the GFS deficit objective for 2013-2014.
He said that was real prudent stewardship.
Based on the fiscal results, you want me to read it again? Let me, if I read it slowly, they'll be able to hear it. But based on the fiscal results through the mid-year, we will meet the GFS deficit objective for 2013-14 that we set out in last May's budget communication. Moreover, I am confident that through the ongoing prudence in the management of our fiscal affairs through the end of June, we can, in fact, do better than our deficit target this year. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I will shortly provide additional details on the performance of the various components of the fiscal accounts in the first half of 2013-2014. And Mr. Speaker, one would be aware of the fact that those opposite last midterm, mid-year budget indicated that we didn't give enough details, so we have obliged them by providing whatever details we think they would require for a clear examination of the economy. But, Mr. Speaker,
And the country doing well and they unhappy? I ain't never been in my life.
Mr. Speaker, I want to take a moment to remind honorable members that the fiscal results on which I am reporting this morning are faithful to the medium-term fiscal consolidation plan that my government unveiled at the time of the May 2013 budget communication. Despite some reports to the contrary, we are indeed proceeding with a logical and well-structured plan of action. This plan originated prior to the last election in our Charter for Governance, and it has continued to inspire our actions since we were entrusted with the governance of the nation by the Bahamian electorate. This is a plan developed by the Bahamian government to serve and advance the interests of Bahamians. And despite the views expressed in some circles, ours is not a plan designed to placate any organization outside of our borders. Let me say it again. At the end of the day, this government will make a decision on everything before it, everything being discussed. And at the end of the day, when we make that decision, we are accountable for the decision we make. And whether it is the economy or whether it is crime, we're not going to shirk our responsibility. We're not going to abdicate those responsibilities. We're going to own up to them, shoulder up to it, and we're going to continue to press forward aggressively to the right solution to the problem. Mr. Speaker, and even though I say that we are not acting to somebody's drumline, I am sure that when we are finished with what we're doing, it will be well received by all of those organizations who are looking at the Bahamas, because we take our responsibility seriously, and through consistency and perseverance, we will continue to do what we pledged to do. I want to reiterate again today, for the benefit of the Bahamian citizens, that addressing the public finance challenge that we face is not an end in and of itself. Eliminating the government deficit and getting our debt burden moving on a downward track is an integral part of my government's national development plan for stronger growth of our economy and more buoyant job creation. As I have stated on previous occasions, successful and durable fiscal consolidation necessarily requires a fundamental restructuring of our fiscal and taxation policies. The details of that restructuring were laid out in the February 2013 white paper on tax reform, and they were an integral part of the medium-term fiscal consolidation plan that I set out in the May 2013 budget communication. As the government moves ahead with these fundamental reforms, it is crucial that focus be maintained on the overarching plan for economic renewal, job creation, and social progress. Our plan is multifaceted, and it is targeted to fighting crime and bolstering national security, strengthening the economy and creating jobs, enhancing health and education and social development generally, as well as promoting the further development of our family islands. That's the plan. I want to stress that we fully recognized the pervasive challenges that crime and the fear of crime pose to both our economy and our way of life in this country. We are thus ever more committed to providing the resources required by the Bahamas Police Force to effectively address this issue in terms of personnel, equipment, and technology. My government is leading efforts in the fight, and we accept that responsibility resolutely and with dedication. To that end, I expect additional criminal courts will be ready soon, and that they will ensure that criminal matters are dealt with promptly and without undue delays. We continue to pursue our efforts in the area of urban renewal on a priority and targeted basis, and are committing additional resources to these efforts. And so that we know, for example, that the challenges of our country are well beyond that of effective policing and effective resourcing of that policing. That it also is getting into the minds of the people of our country, and in doing so, getting to see the environment in which they live and the challenges emanating from that environment, and being, notwithstanding limited resources in our country, but being committed, Mr. Speaker, to relentlessly tackling the problems associated with poverty and being able to bring relief to people with the hope that as we are policing, as we are enforcing, as we are producing the courts and quick justice, Mr. Speaker, we are also reaching people in their lives and being able to heal them as best we can through the programs that we are offering. And, Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue unabated in doing so. The achievement of these objectives, Mr. Speaker, clearly rests on stronger economic growth going forward. To that end, our plan encompasses a variety of measures, including strengthening our key tourism industry, promoting additional foreign direct investment across the country, and particularly in Grand Bahama and the Family Islands, exploring avenues for further diversifying our economy, especially in the agricultural area, through science and technology, to improve our competitiveness in food production. We are also committed to further diversifying our financial services sector, the further development and expansion of our yachting and shipping registries, expanding our investments in education, and strengthening national training through the National Training Agency to establish a competency-based training and job placement system that is flexible and responsive to the actual requirements of the workplace. Mr. Speaker, we're doing all those things. You all just got to talk about it more often. You all got to present it more often. I mean, just yesterday, the most exhilarating discussion, Mr. Speaker, on education. And it was just such a wonderful sort of opportunity we had to discuss the future and where there seems to be a communication will be made on it. Major steps and major leaps, really, in terms of moving forward in education. Mr. Speaker, the government is also taking steps to guarantee that the process of starting a business in the Bahamas is as straightforward as possible by removing common roadblocks that often hold people back. One of the key indicators of an efficient economy is the ease of doing business. This measure represents the efficiency of the government in getting businesses up and running and actively contributing in a positive way to the local economy as quickly as possible. Currently, the Bahamas is too far behind other countries in the world in this metric, and steps are now being taken to ensure that we are able to adequately compete in getting businesses up and running in an effective manner. And of course, colleagues, we just yesterday made some decisions with respect to ease of business in processing through the Ministry of Works and being able to ensure in planning that we are able to move with expedition. As promised in the Charter of Governance, My government is proceeding diligently in tackling the high cost of energy, which is a heavy burden on the average householder, and perhaps the greatest single impediment to development and economic growth. Towards this end, the exercise which started early last year on energy reform is proceeding expeditiously. Requests for proposals are now being considered by the government's energy advisors, and the government should, within the coming months, complete arrangements between BEC and a private energy group, Mr. Speaker, that could increase efficiency in the energy sector and significantly lower the cost of electricity to the consumer. In October of last year, Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas was one of only 3 countries in the region recognized by the World Bank for taking definitive steps to improve our business environment. We were recognized for making transferring property easier by reducing the stamp duty. The Bahamas was also recognized for enhancing its insolvency process by implementing rules for the remuneration of liquidators, allowing voluntary liquidations and outlining clawback provisions for suspect transactions. We have focused our attention on these and the other major areas of our change and growth agenda, and we will persist in planning and further developing initiatives that will assuredly get our economy growing more strongly in the years ahead. From the outset, we have been guided by the hard reality that our plan could not simply be fueled by spending more money. As we came to office, it was clear that the finances of the government needed to be returned to a position of sustainability if we are to strengthen confidence in the Bahamas as an attractive and secure place for investment, not only by foreigners, but by Bahamian entrepreneurs as well. If confidence is eroded by lax fiscal policies, we all bear the consequences. Credit downgrades and higher interest rates for the government and Bahamian businesses and citizens, as well as the potential for further downgrades and higher rates if we fail to act decisively and stop mortgaging the future to support today's spending. Now, does any of this matter to the average Bahamian citizen? I am convinced that it must, and it most certainly does matter. For one thing, high and rising burden of government debt chews up ever-increasing sums of our revenues merely to pay interest on the debt and to repay maturing debt. This financial year, for example, fully 21 cents of every one of our revenue dollars will be siphoned off to debt servicing. So 21 cents of every dollar we earn will now go to paying debt. That is money that is unavailable for other worthy and productive economic and social uses, such as education and training, healthcare, and hospitals. High government borrowings and debt also lead to higher rates of interest, which affect the daily lives of all Bahamians through higher monthly payments for consumer loans and mortgages. Workers' pay packets are thus left with less money to cover ongoing and essential living expenses. We therefore have been very clear since we came to office that we would implement priority initiatives within our plan to the extent that we could do so in a fiscally responsible manner. We have also stressed that we would strive to reform and rebuild the basic structure of the public finances such that over time we return them to a self-sustaining basis with no need for annual deficit financing and borrowing. That has to be our objective. That is our objective. So, Mr. Speaker, at the same time, by putting the burden of government debt on a downward path back to more desirable and appropriate levels, we will recreate the fiscal room necessary to finance the full complement of our national development plan, including economic renewal and stronger job creation. And so we're arguing, Mr. Speaker, and we are arguing to this commitment that once we could get this fiscal house in order, debt heading downwards, Mr. Speaker, we will be able to do the things that we promised the people we're going to do. We are going to bring about the kind of development, even more manifold than is now what I've now described. We are going to bring about development, and we're going to bring about development where Bahamians are in the front line of the development. That has to be the objective. So seen in this light, fiscal reform is at the heart of the government's plan for national economic and social development. In turn, tax reform is a critical component of fiscal reform. These reforms are absolutely necessary to allow the government to follow through in making its national development plan a reality. Now, in the budget communication last year, I set out the details of the various components of our fiscal reform strategy in the form of a medium-term fiscal consolidation plan through 2016-2017. The plan consists of 4 key parts: growing the economy, restraining expenditure, enhancing revenue administration, and securing new sources of revenue. Very clear in what we were committed, I'm saying. 4 parts: growing the economy, restraining expenditure, enhancing revenue administration, and securing new sources of revenue. Through this plan, and in combination with our actions to strengthen economic growth, we are fundamentally and in a balanced way reforming the structure of both recurrent and capital expenditure, as well as the structure of government revenues. And this will allow us to, Mr. Speaker, eliminate the untenable imbalance between recurrent expenditure and revenue. It will allow us to eliminate the GFS deficit and arrest the growth in the government debt burden and move it onto a steady downward path to more sustainable levels. On the recurrent expenditure front, we are taking a variety of measures, Mr. Speaker, because there's always the question, Mr. Speaker, that the government raise the money in taxes and then spend it, and just spend it all over the place. So I want to be able to send a message, really, that on the recurrent expenditure front, we are taking a variety of measures to restrain the growth of spending and to make that spending more efficient and more effective. Smart spending.
Yes, sir. Smart spending.
Right. The overall framework for strengthened public financial management is taking place within the scope of the new Financial Administration and Audit Act. The Ministry of Finance, in a determined fashion, is enforcing strict expenditure discipline and accountability across all government ministries and departments and public corporations, and sometimes, Mr. Speaker, causing great anxiety and vexation on the part of ministers, Mr. Speaker, and we obviously, it's work in progress, and we got to make sure, Mr. Speaker, we continue to not slow down the sort of things we want to do, and not, for example, reach a position where we have wonderful work in urban renewal and home repairs, and then all of a sudden it stops. Those are things, Mr. Speaker, that we have to ensure the continuity of funding remains in place, Mr. Speaker, going forward. I think you all agree with that. In this regard, the government is firmly committed to a fundamental review of its operations as well as its expenditure and revenue control mechanisms, seeking to instill best practices wherever feasible. The Ministry of Finance in particular is being restructured and strengthened in order to enhance its capacity to more effectively monitor the operations and expenditures of government ministries, departments, and public corporations. We are vigorously striving for higher levels of accountability and transparency. As regards public corporations, The Ministry of Finance is exerting more direct oversight of their financial affairs to ensure that they strive for greater levels of efficiency and effectiveness, and that they are subject to greater accountability to the government. This will allow our budgeting process to be more comprehensively informed by budgets of public corporations, and so that a truly comprehensive approach to fiscal discipline is achieved. The government has asked subsidy-dependent corporations, and we know who they are, to better align their expenditure plans with the resources that are available from the government. And again, an effort to bring focused attention to those areas in government that we subsidize, with a view to bringing, in the first instance, their conforming, right, with what now comes from the government, and then being able to incrementally improve the position to the point where the subsidies are minimal. As well, our planning function is being strengthened such that new investments and projects are reviewed in an economically and financially sound and effective manner. Members would know that governments from time to time are induced to provide subsidies to existing businesses as a way of incentivizing through marketing collaboration. And again, when we came into office, our predecessors were spending as much as $29 million in subsidies in Grand Bahama to keep the Grand Bahama economy afloat. I don't want to comment on second guessing. All I would say is we've reduced that now to about half. And but the fact of the matter is that the whole question, Mr. Speaker, of the extent to which concessions and incentives in business in our country, it becomes an open bidding war, so to speak, and competitively in countries in our region and elsewhere in the world. And a new economic phenomenon has developed where a company will come and say, listen, I got 500 people employed, and if you want me to keep them employed, you got to look at the fact that I'm losing $5 million a year. And if I'm losing $5 million a year, I need you to be able to help me get over this period. And how do we help you get over this period? And then we have to decide on maybe what we will do is we will provide a joint marketing program with you, and we'll put $1 million into marketing the destination. So you don't have to put the $1 million in. And so it becomes a very interesting subject that members could interest themselves in, because the way of the future of our country, I think, will heavily be influenced by the courage that we have in looking at our economy and being able to make the right decisions with respect to the extent to which government revenue, the extent to which the consolidated fund is used to keep businesses afloat in our country. Also, under the Financial Administration and Audit Act, the government is introducing new public sector procurement procedures which impose greater controls and greater efficiency on public spending for goods and services for all public entities, including public corporations. We have also bolstered our approach to the management of government debt. With technical assistance from the International Monetary Fund, we have established a debt management committee comprising representatives of finance, the Treasury, and the central bank. Through this committee, a new debt management policy framework has been developed to minimize the financing costs of government debt while also minimizing risk. Through these actions, recurrent expenditure will be allowed to grow in dollar terms through the medium term to allow the financing of new and emerging priorities, such as the hiring of doctors and other staff for the new mini hospitals. However, the plan does signal the government's commitment to a reduction in recurrent expenditure relative to the size of the economy. This will require the setting of clear spending priorities going forward. that will begin the longer-term process of getting recurrent expenditure back to its level relative to GDP that prevailed during our first term in office. Capital expenditure over the last few years has been at exceptionally high levels relative to historical trends, well, Mr. Speaker, in excess of 4% of GDP. That has reflected important investments in public infrastructure that will underpin more buoyant economic growth in the coming years. However, due to the fiscal exigencies, our medium-term plan calls for these expenditures to be returned to their more traditional level of 3% of GDP. Given emerging requirements, this will require strict prioritization and timely profiling on the part of the government. The government's actions on the revenue front begin with measures to improve the collection of existing taxes in line with what is rightfully due to the government. Again, in spite of the misinformed and jaded assertions that have recently been advanced, we are fully cognizant that our revenue system is seriously deficient, and we are actively moving to remedy this situation through a number of concrete measures. Let me just say it again. I don't want to carry the baggage of my predecessors. I want to fix it for them. So in the event that one day when you become the government again, if our democracy allows it, you'll be able to see the path that I took as the Minister of Finance to fixing the problems you left in place. And we could beat our chest as much as we like. If you don't institutionalize them, as you didn't, planning and accounting for all of these things, then you would expect me to do it for you and the country. And that's what we're doing. In terms of the real property tax, for instance, we announced initiatives in 2013 to reduce arrears and enhance collections, including the new amnesty program in respect of real property taxes that incentivized increased payments, and as a result, strides were made in adding new properties to the tax register. We had committed also to correct the anomalies from very large hikes in some property tax bills. You know, when I started to look at this, and I said, well, look here, how much I pay? And then the fellow tell me, say, what, $8,900 a year? I said, well, somebody, how you could, that's more than a month's salary for me. Why would real property tax won't charge me that? And somebody drive past my house and say, maybe I live next to Crystal Palace. So the point is, though, what happens is that is why a review is so necessary that takes into consideration the culture of our country, because there are people who own some real, in terms of appearances, palatial homes, who work 10, 15 years to reach that point in the life where they're able to do it, and then all of a sudden, so I think that's why reviews of this kind of tax, the whole approach to taxation reform becomes very, very important. And that is why, whether it's on this side or your side, when we begin the question of what is the most effective, what is the fairest tax to, in the whole scheme of taxes, that is why we have to have an enlightened approach to this regard. Because right now, we have some taxes in place. In some instances, customs duties, some taxes in place, that the poor people are carrying the burden in the country today. Not the rich people, not the people who are making the noise. The poor people are carrying it. And so when you start getting poor people to say, I don't want this, I don't want that, they're the ones who are carrying it now. All right? And we haven't done any kind of job to let people know who are actually paying the burden of taxes in this country. And so I just want you all to know that I met with the private sector yesterday, and I will tell you as I go to conclude what happened in that meeting, but everyone knows, and as I told them, my government, more than you people, want an economy that works for this country. But if you think you have a better idea than me, I'm not going to let the Ministry of Finance stand in your way. I'm going to keep on repeating this now. Bring me a better idea. Let me see what you say. Now, I'm also doing something. I want you to see what I'm doing. In the meantime, and I told them this yesterday, I said, please remember this. I am the Minister of Finance and I am the Prime Minister. The Minister of Finance is not in this meeting talking to you today. You're talking to the Prime Minister. The Minister of Finance is downstairs going ahead with VAT as is indicated. All of the mechanisms and the instruments are in place moving forward. That's the Minister of Finance. You're talking to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister can hear you today because the Prime Minister has not joined with the Minister of Finance on this one. That's what I'm saying. Not yet. And I want to be straight now. Listen to this now. So I want you to hear me. No, I want you to hear me. I want you to hear it. I want you to hear it. Let me say it again. Let me say it again.
He's keeping an open mind.
Let me say it again. Let me say it again. Let me say it again. No, hear me. Let me say it.
Even listen to what you got to say. He's keeping an open mind. And then
Members, honorable members, members,
Mr. Speaker, I told them they were talking to the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, who must listen to every voice in every part of our country. But in the meantime, the Minister of Finance is fully aware that the country is floating towards some icebergs. And no, the icebergs are the icebergs that are floating in the water.
Members.
Side over here. And those icebergs are out there floating, and they're there. And Mr. Speaker, and so what I'm saying is, so therefore remember this. Remember this, sir. We want to do the best for this country. We committed ourselves to correcting the anomalies from very large hikes in some property tax bills. The undertaking, Mr. Speaker, will be delivered upon in the context of the general assessment in the property values, which is slated to be undertaken in the next months. As part of revenue reform, we also announced a new schedule of fees for various government services that better reflect the cost to government of providing those services to citizens and businesses. As I signaled last year, there are still some areas of government fees that need to be adjusted in line with the modern realities of the cost of providing government services. As for actions to enhance revenues, our efforts are multifaceted and include, Mr. Speaker, implementation of a broad program for tax reform. We have set our sights on the VAT, which will coincide with a significant reduction in customs duties and excise taxes and the elimination of the hotel occupancy tax, with the intention of generating the largest slice of targeted revenue improvements over the next few years. That is what the country is doing now. The country is preparing, that it has been doing. It has been in the books of the IMF and the Ministry of Finance from Bill Allen as Minister of Finance. These things have been discussed moving forward. And it's a matter of moving forward, and it continues to move forward. We are modernizing the system of real property tax administration. State-of-the-art GIS-based technology is being required or acquired and to put to use such that it generates a doubling of revenues over the medium term. And Mr. Speaker, I want to be able to get that. We are modernizing the system of real property tax administration. State-of-the-art GIS-based technology is being acquired and put to use such that it generates a doubling of revenues or the medium-term equivalent to 1% of GDP. In this process, we will also revamp the existing legislation to make it more relevant and effective. We are reforming the operations of the Customs Department to bring them up to modern international standards. In this process, revenue controls are being strengthened and technology deployed more optimally so that customs officers can be deployed to the front line to enforce the laws and collect more of the revenue that is due to the government. The excise stamping program for tobacco products, which will reduce revenue leakage from smuggling and counterfeit products, has already been launched and will be escalated. And finally, the framework is advancing that will lead to the establishment of the new Central Revenue Administration and a revenue court to improve the efficiency of revenue administration and secure revenue collections. All in all, this revenue plan of action is expected to increase the revenue yield of our tax system by some 4% of GDP and bring it more in line with the norm generally observed in the Caribbean, though still below it. With the successful implementation of this medium-term plan, we will deliver on our commitment to Bahamians to bring order to the public finances by eliminating the deficit and putting the burden of government debt on a downward path. More importantly, its level in 2016 to 2017 will be significantly lower relative to what it would be in the face of failure on our part to implement our medium-term plan. What would occur if we failed to act? Were the government to simply ignore the fiscal problem that it faces, its levels of borrowings and debt would go on unchecked, and the burden of debt will grow to very dangerous levels approaching 70% of GDP and beyond over time. Worse still, the effects of confidence on the interest rates and on the growth of both our economy and jobs would be devastating. For guidance, one need only look back at the reaction of the international rating agencies to fiscal developments in the Bahamas. In December of 2012, Moody announced a downgrade in our country's credit rating along with a negative outlook. To underpin its statement, Moody cited a significant deterioration of the government's balance sheet since 2007, which was exacerbated by a low revenue base and a high and rising debt level. Such downgrades would mean higher interest rates for all. Mr. Speaker, by taking decisive action now, the government is seeking to arrest and reverse the trend in our public finances, eliminate the GFS deficit, and get the burden of our government debt back down to more desirable and sustainable levels. It is for these reasons that fiscal reform is a core component of the government's national development plan going forward. The key to successful and durable fiscal reform is to re-engineer government such that it does things better, not that government does less. On one hand, that means ensuring that its programs and services are delivered in as efficient and effective a manner as possible. On the other hand, it implies a revenue system that is administered not only efficiently, but in a fashion that is as fair and possible, such that the burden of taxation is appropriately borne by all segments of society. Now, Mr. Speaker, VAT was put as the centerpiece of tax reform. And after carefully considering the range of new revenue options at its disposal, the Ministry of Finance has been the government decided on a sales tax in the form of a value-added tax was the most suitable option for the Bahamas. This was done years. In reviewing the state of the debate on VAT and tax reform, I believe it is important to note that VAT as a core feature of tax reform is not an option that has recently surfaced. Indeed, discussion of the possible introduction of a VAT in the Bahamas goes back many years in one form or another and across administrations. What is novel is that it is an option. What is novel is not that it is an option, but that it is now under active consideration. In understanding the advice which we received from inside the Ministry of Finance, there was indeed awareness of the alternative broad revenue measures that the government might consider. I'm advised that a VAT has merits over a simple sales tax because the built-in system of checks and balances makes a VAT less prone to fraud and evasion than a sales tax. As part of a broader reform package, I am advised that the VAT combined with lower import duties and excise taxes would also lead to fairer taxation under which the segments of society that spend a large share of their incomes on services would now pay taxes on those services. Under our current system, based primarily on customs duties, those persons have had to pay less indirect taxes on the services that they buy, while those who buy goods, for the most part, have had to bear the brunt of the tax burden. I also want to stress that the government is fully committed to mitigating the impact of VAT on the most needy in society through the financial enhancement of its various social assistance programs. This is a practice that has been adopted in other countries that have introduced the VAT and is one that we believe is most appropriate in the Bahamian context. In deciding to introduce a VAT in the Bahamas, our reasoning has been straightforward and clear. This new tax is intended to secure an adequate revenue base to support modern government and allow us to realize our plan for national economic and social development. Establish a tax structure that promotes economic efficiency, stronger economic growth, and more job creation, and make our system of taxation more fair across all segments of society. And I want to stress that throughout the implementation process, the Ministry of Finance officials have been meeting with various stakeholders, civic groups, and citizens to review the draft VAT legislation and to listen to concerns. In a number of instances where appropriate and consistent with the intent of VAT, these useful exchanges have resulted in modifications to the proposed VAT law. I would also mention the very constructive dialogue that I've had with representatives of the Coalition for Responsible Taxation. As it is widely known, the Coalition is desirous of commissioning additional in-depth analysis of the VAT option, along with other possible options for meeting the fiscal targets in our medium-term fiscal consolidation plan, including the fit of income and payroll taxes under our circumstances. Members should know that I have informed the Coalition that I acknowledge their concern and am amenable to hearing the results of their studies as we move forward. It is not appropriate to belittle the efforts of the private sector to undertake independent economic impact analysis of our fiscal reform options. As such, I am open to receiving feedback on the outcome of their research. Whilst this happens, the technical preparations of the Ministry of Finance are continuing. Having said that, I agreed that the Ministry of Finance will provide Coalition researchers with whatever data and research material that they might require in order to complete their work in a reasonably and timely fashion. I have also alerted the Coalition to the reality that it would be unacceptable to inordinately delay fundamental and necessary tax reforms. The government is itself engaged in final reviews of the entire process. And at the end of the day, decisions would be made in the best interest of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And so, in essence, Mr. Speaker, what I have said is that we are proceeding, but we are open, because at the end of the day, we want to arrive at a position, Mr. Speaker, that is known to and acceptable to the people of our country. And as I've indicated to the Coalition, we need not have a fight over this, because you're not fighting me, you'll be fighting the public treasury. And you need not spend money on that. Use your best efforts to sit with us and work together so that we could come up with that something is manifestly in the best interest of this country, and do it where we are all working together to that kind of conclusion. That's the process that has been agreed to yesterday in the office of the Prime Minister, that the Minister of Finance will continue whilst the Prime Minister talks to them, right, to do those things. And so and that was the only way of trying to show you, just trying to show you that the country must continue along the path, getting the instruments and everything and ready, because as you would all appreciate, BAC is positioned at 15%. The Inter-American Development Bank says 10%. James Smith says 7.5%. So you all know, in terms of the public discussion, that the government has many options available to it to arrive at and of course, if you know me well enough, you would know that I know in my head what should happen.
That's right.
No, that's all right. That's right. Yeah, delay to stop those people who need an opportunity to examine it, to give them the time to do that. Okay? So, Mr. Speaker, before I turn,
We respect the private sector.
before I turn,
We respect the private
before I turn, I don't think we should.
Listen, look what happened to y'all. Lady y'all.
Mr. Speaker,
Honourable members,
Mr. Speaker, before I turn to a discussion of the mid-year fiscal results, I will very briefly review the current and prospective economic environment, and in the process, tell the leaders of the opposition, just try and focus on survival.
members,
Global economic developments and outlook.
members.
Global economic developments and outlook.
You say the central
I told you that before. You ain't listening to me.
The near-term performance of and prospects for the world economy have been broadly in line with, if not stronger than, what has been expected at the time of the 2013-14 budget. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, in its January 2014 World Outlook, the International Monetary Fund suggests that the tide may finally be rising, largely on account of ongoing and strengthening recovery in the advanced economies. The International Monetary Fund estimates that the world economy expanded by 3% in 2013, and that growth will be slightly stronger than previously expected in 2014 at 3.7%. As for the U.S. economy, the IMF expects more buoyant domestic demand in 2014 as a result of the lessened fiscal drag flowing from the recent budget agreement. Growth in our most important trading partner is now forecast at just under 3% this year, up from 1.9% in 2013. The IMF has also increased its short-term forecast for the euro area economy, after having contracted by 0.4% last year, is expected to expand by 1% in 2014, though the recovery will continue to be uneven across its various member nations. The United Kingdom economy, in contrast, is seen to expand by 2.4% in 2014, up from 1.7% in 2013, on the basis of improved confidence and easier credit conditions. Our domestic economic developments outlook. On the basis of the latest reports from the central bank, there are clear indications that the Bahamian economy clear indications that the Bahamian economy has continued to recover from the global crisis on the basis of a slightly improved tourism performance and ongoing foreign investment projects. The bank estimates that the growth momentum will be sustained through 2014 and beyond. This reflects increased room capacity and greater airlift combined with ongoing strengthening in a number of client markets. The construction sector is also expected to remain buoyant on the basis of brisk foreign investment activity. This more positive economic situation and outlook is now being mirrored on the jobs front. In its latest labor force survey, the Department of Statistics reported that the national unemployment rate declined significantly to 15.4% in November 2013, down from 16.2% in May. The particularly positive element of that report, Mr. Speaker, the particularly positive element of that report was that the fall in unemployment reflected an appreciable gain in employment, which was strong enough to absorb a concurrent increase in the labor force. The number of discouraged workers fell by 15% over the 6-month period. And that is an important economic indicator. The PLP is in power, and they now have a belief that there are jobs for them. And whether it is liked or isn't liked, they are now seeing that there are jobs for them. So, Mr. Speaker, as well, the rate of unemployment declined in both New Providence and the Grand Bahama markets, and you will hear more about that today. As for economic prospects going forward, the International Monetary Fund concluded at the end of its latest Article 4 consultations last November that the Bahamian economy is expected to expand more strongly this year and going forward.
Yes, sir.
Growth this year and next is pegged at 2.3% and 2.8% respectively. The executive board of the fund, Mr. Speaker, the executive board of the fund reviewed the mission's report on January 17, 2014, and endorsed its findings. So in its concluding statement, the board asserted that, and I quote, steadfast and timely execution of needed reform will be crucial, end quote. That's the International Monetary Fund. I don't want to make no secrets about it. This is what they're saying. In it, right, that, I quote, steadfast and timely execution of needed reform will be crucial, and they're talking about fiscal reform and tax reform. And they said, but note what they say, and it will be crucial to growth performance over the medium term. And so what they're arguing, that if we carried out the program that we've announced, that it will add momentum to growth as opposed to retarding growth. Well, listen, let me put it this way. I'm going to define if when you go to Bimini, when you go to Grand Bahama, when you go to San Salvador, yes, when you go to Exuma, when you go to Eleuthera, the word if is being defined for you. Yes. 124? That's it here. Mr. Speaker, as a result of greater expenditure discipline and greater attention to revenue collection, we anticipate a continued reduction in the budget deficit and a slower increase in government's indebtedness this fiscal year. I shall now provide details of our performance and how we see the government's finances evolving over the remaining months of this fiscal year. Recurrent revenue. The evolution of recurrent revenues in the first 6 months of the 2013-2014 fiscal year has been relatively buoyant and largely on track. Through December, revenues have amounted to some $669 million, Mr. Speaker, up by $36 million or 5.7%. Yeah, so through the comparable period in 2012-2013. So over that period, we're up by $36 million. On the basis of this performance, we now expect full fiscal year recurrent revenues on the order of, Mr. Speaker, $1.480 billion, 1,480 million. That will represent, Mr. Speaker, 17.2% of GDP, up from 16.7% in 2012-2013. As for recurrent expenditure, the data for the first 6 months of the 2013-2014 fiscal year reveal that it totaled $841 million, representing 48% of the full fiscal year estimate. That total is also essentially unchanged from the $839 million that was expended in the first half of 2012-2013. On the basis of this mid-year performance and ongoing spending control, we expect recurrent expenditure to be held to $1,720 million over the full 2013-2014 fiscal year. That will be down slightly from the total of $1,737 million that was forecast at the time of the budget. This performance is in line with our stated objective of reducing recurrent expenditure relative to the size of the economy as part of the fiscal consolidation plan. In the 2013-2014 fiscal year, it will stand at 20% of GDP. That will be down from the peak of 20.8% registered in 2010-2011. So in the first 6 months of this fiscal year, capital expenditure amounted to $106 million, or 36% of the estimate for the entire fiscal year presented in the 2013-2014 budget communication. However, we expect a pickup in this category of expenditure in the second half of this year, with a total capital expenditure coming in or on target at $295 million for the full year. We got to do some things.
Yes, sir.
And we can't hold back on them. That will start, Mr. Speaker, that will still represent, and even though we can do these things and we can pick it up in this second half, that will still represent a substantial reduction relative to the size of the economy from a high of 4.9% in the 2011-2012 budget to 3.4% this fiscal year. They can't be talking about not responsibly managing the economy. They can't be talking.
Their press conference must now be cancelled.
Deficit and debt. The GFS deficit during the first half of this fiscal year amounting to $238 million, Mr. Speaker, down from the $295 million recorded in 2012-2013, Mr. Speaker. So let me just say, the GFS deficit, the member for East Grand Bahama likes this kind of talk. The GFS deficit during the first half of this fiscal year amounted to $238 million. And that is down from the $295 million recorded in 2012-2013.
Wow.
So, Mr. Speaker, on a full year basis, we expect the deficit to come in on target at $447 million, or 5.2 million, or 5.2% of GDP. That will be down significantly from the 6.4% of GDP registered in 2012-2013. Government debt at $5.1 billion, Mr. Speaker, at the end of 2014 is also expected to come in as forecast at the time of the last budget, Mr. Speaker. And so for the purposes of those who are interested in these figures, That will amount to 59.7% of GDP. Revenue measures. Mr. Speaker, this mid-year fiscal statement contains a very small number of revenue measures as follows. Imports of point-of-sale equipment will be duty-free to assist the business communities to prepare for VAT or whatever tax is imposed. Sparkling wine, what? Sparkling wines and cognac are being moved from the Tariff Act, where they are now duty-free, to the Excise Act to secure some positive revenues on these products. Imports of vehicles for the use of the government will be duty-free, and the customs duty on imported eggs is being increased to 30% to address the competitiveness of the domestic. So, Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, I have provided this honorable House with a mid-year update. Sorry.
Members.
Mr. Speaker, I have provided this honorable House with a mid-year update on my government's ongoing prudent husbandry of the nation's public finances. Through
You ain't borrow no money? No need. You ain't borrow no money, man. No. Are you serious? Are you serious?
I concluded, I did look at the Minister of State for Finance because, as one would appreciate, Mr. Speaker, in deficit budgeting, one has to borrow money every year, and we were looking for $300 million. And the Minister of State for Finance and the officer from the Ministry of Finance and the Royal Bank of Canada went on a major 5-day world trip to the financial capitals of the world. They went to London and flew from London after meetings to New York, and after New York they went to Boston, and after Boston they went to Los Angeles. And Mr. Speaker, they were just going to see what the market was all about and what could happen. They were going even at an inconvenient time because holidays were coming up and whatnot. And as they were going in, some Caribbean countries were coming out, or vice versa. But Mr. Speaker, let me look at him again. 6 billion? 6 billion. The offering, Mr. Speaker, was so profoundly significant. I looked at him just to hear the figure myself. Again. 6 billion was offered. 6 billion. And that, no, what I'm saying is, what I'm saying is this, Mr. Speaker. I happen to have had dinner with one of the leading chief executives of one of the leading funds in New York afterwards, who spoke with such special feeling about the Bahamas. And he was one of those who had offered to subscribe to the fund, which resulted in a lower interest. But it's amazing to see the difficulties of some of our neighbors in the region and what they're finding, and to go into the financial capitals in these institutions, Mr. Speaker, and be oversubscribed so substantially. And the only point I want to make is that it was such an incredibly successful trip, and a reminder that to this country that they have a government that is respected by people all over the world. And will tell you and Mr. Speaker, if there is any doubt, Mr. Speaker, about the level of maturation of the leadership of my party, Mr. Speaker, in recognizing these young ones, even those who are more impatient than others, Mr. Speaker. I just want to remind them, Mr. Speaker, when they look at me, I am absolutely secure in recognizing that the talent that I have, the talent, and Mr. Speaker, lest there be any doubt, when I'm, and I hope the Leader of the Opposition is not with me, but when I have my feet metaphorically in the waters, paddling and looking back at what's happening in the Bahamas, these same faces will be there. These same faces. So, Mr. Speaker,
That's where it's been set up.
Mr. Speaker, I have provided, Mr. Speaker, I have provided this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, I have provided this honorable House with a mid-year update on my government's ongoing prudent husbandry of the nation's public finances. Through ongoing and steadfast adherence to our fiscal targets, I believe we will succeed in eliminating the deficit and returning the level of government debt to more prudent and sustainable levels over time. That is our intention, that is our hope, that is everything we're going to work on. And as I did at last month's Bahamas Business Outlook Conference, Mr. Speaker, I have tried today to share my optimism, Mr. Speaker, and my great optimism for the future of our country. And I take into consideration your opening statements with respect to the horrific experience of your constituents, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will not compromise in my government's effort to ensure that we take all of the steps, Mr. Speaker, to minimize the impact of crime on the people of our country and the fear of crime. We are not going to stop. We're not going to see our job, Mr. Speaker, as being well done, thou good and faithful servant, Mr. Speaker, and allow that to make us feel good. We are going to continue to reach down, Mr. Speaker, as far as we could reach, to understand the symptoms that exist out there, Mr. Speaker, and to fix them as best we can. And in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, there will be, and I've said this and I've said it over and over, that I am satisfied that once we can have the permanent presence, uninterrupted presence of police officers in those areas that we have defined, Mr. Speaker, that we are going to have a major positive impact, Mr. Speaker, on what is happening in our country. And, Mr. Speaker, as early as March, we're going to have courts that will be functioning as early as March, Mr. Speaker, up to 7, 8, 9 courts at the same time, with new judges at the same time, Mr. Speaker, which will obviate or preclude or stop, Mr. Speaker, or let me put it this way, no, I don't want to interfere, Mr. Speaker, which will cause, Mr. Speaker, us to have the best opportunity not to have people released on bail because they could not be brought to trial in a reasonable period of time. We can fix that. So my optimism, Mr. Speaker, I hope is seen, is obvious. Resurging economic growth and a rebound in employment opportunities for Bahamians, Mr. Speaker, are a concrete undergirding of my optimism. Concrete proof, Mr. Speaker, that my optimism is well-founded. Our commitment to the path that we have charted, Mr. Speaker, will never waver. I want to conclude. My last words in this debate. Our commitment to the path that we have charted will not ever waver. Never. Full speed ahead to bring relief to this country.
Bring it on back.
Thank you, members.
Our Lord. That's the way we come down.
Members. Yes. Thank you, members. Order that the communication be brought up.